the NHL, a struggling franchise will often pin its hopes to a top draft pick, a franchise savior. These players are expected to lead a team back to glory. However, not all of these franchise saviors live up to the enormous hype. In some cases, these players carry the weight of the organization's dreams, only to flatter under the pressure or to circumstances beyond their control. Today we will speak about 5 notable cases of NHL players who were drafted to rescue their franchises, but ultimately failed to meet expectations. These are the failed franchise saviors of the National Hockey League. In 1993, the Ottawa Senators franchise was in dire need of a star. The team had just finished its inaugural season as the NHL's worst team, and the expansion Senators were desperate for a face of the franchise to build around. Enter Alexandre Daigle, an electrifying junior forward from Quebec, labeled as a can't-miss superstar, and Ottawa couldn't miss on this opportunity. Ottawa made Daigle the first overall pick in the 1993 NHL entry draft, signing him to a rich 5-year, $12.5 million contract, an unseen sum for an 18-year-old at the time. In fact, his lucrative deal angered many other teams, so much that the NHL later instituted a cap on rookie salaries. Daigle's confidence matched the hype. Upon being drafted, he quipped, "I'm glad I got drafted first, because no one remembers number 2, referencing the 2nd overall pick, which turned out to be future Hall of Famer Chris Pronger. And this quote would backfire tremendously. But for the time being, the stage was set for Daigle to be Ottawa's savior. But reality started to hit hard once Daigle hit the NHL ice. Thrown immediately into a leading role, he struggled to make an impact on a weak Senators squad. The young forward showed flashes of talent, but not the superstar production everyone expected of him. In his rookie season, he managed a modest 51 points, and questions began swirling about his heart and desire. Ottawa continued to lose game after game. Daigle later admitted he was unprepared for the pressure of being labeled as a franchise cornerstone at 18 years old, dealing with, and I quote, suffocating expectations and media attention in both English and French markets. The Senators were a new organization, still learning the ropes. All the weight fell on Daigle's shoulders. Without much veteran support or structure around him, Dean's development wobbled. By his 3rd and 4th seasons, his points totals remained ordinary. Ottawa was still dwelling at the bottom of the standings. By the 1997-98 season, just 5 years into his career, Daigle had garnered a reputation as a draft bust, prompting Ottawa to trade him away mid-season. The one-time chosen one was sent to the Philadelphia Flyers, after totaling only 74 goals in 4.5 seasons with the Sens. In Philadelphia, Daigle got to observe a real franchise superstar, Eric Lindros, and he realized how much drive and true dedication he himself lacked. After brief stints with the Flyers, Tampa Bay, and the Rangers, Daigle walked away from hockey at age 25, although he would make a small comeback later, including a stint with the Minnesota Wild, where he reinvented himself as a role player. Daigle never came close to the generational talent status. Finished his NHL career with 327 points in 616 games, a respectable output for many players, but a glaring disappointment for a quote-unquote franchise savior. The Senators themselves, who hoped Daigle would superhead their rise, remained the NHL's bottom dwellers through the mid-1990s. It wasn't until other draft picks and savvy acquisitions, such as late-round gem Daniel Alfredsson and Alexei Yashin, that Ottawa began to improve. By the late 90s and early 2000s, the Senators became a playoff team, but Alexandre Daigle had little to do with their resurgence. His story became one of expectation versus reality, a talented junior star placed in an impossible situation. Daigle's failure proved how fragile the franchise savior label can be. But just a few years later, Atlanta made the same bet on their first ever draft pick, Patrik Stefan. When the NHL awarded Atlanta a new franchise in 1999, the Atlanta Thrashers were born, and they looked to the entry draft for a hero to put hockey on the map in Georgia. With the first overall pick in 1999, Atlanta selected Patrik Stefan, a Czech center, making him the first draft pick in the team history. Atlanta's management envisioned the skilled playmaking Stefan as the centerpiece of their brand new team, someone to attract fans and guide the Thrashers through the inevitable growing pains of an expansion franchise. However, what they didn't know is that the 1999 draft class would later be regarded as one of the weakest in NHL history. But at the time, Stefan was widely considered a solid number 1 choice. Standing at 6'2" with good vision, he was seen a safe pick to build around. The Thrashers, however, were about to learn how heavy the burden is on an 18-year-old to carry the entire franchise. Stefan's NHL career got off to a rocky start and never quite took off. The Thrashers were, as expected, one of the worst teams in the league in their early years, and Stefan had a hard time producing on a squad with limited talent. In fact, Atlanta's points percentage was a disappointing .311 over their first 3 seasons, reflecting just how overmatched the team was night after night. Stefan himself was not immune to bad luck as well. He suffered multiple injuries, including a broken jaw broken ankle, and a hyperextended elbow in his first few seasons. These setbacks hindered his development and consistency. Meanwhile, the Thrashers acquired more young talent with high picks in the following years. Danny Heatley, number 2 overall in 2000, and Ilya Kovalchuk, number 1 in 2001. And they quickly emerged as the franchise's new stars, far outshining Stefan in both production and fan excitement. By his 4th season, Stefan had yet to crack 40 points in a campaign. By the 5th year in his career, in 2003 to 2004, he had played a full 82-game season and recorded a career-high 40 points, a very respectable total, but far from what you'd hope in a franchise player. However, the context is important as well. The early 2000s were a still low-scoring, clutch-and-grab hockey era. But even so, Stefan was looking more like a supporting player than a star. After the 2004 to 2005 lockout, Stefan returned to a Thrashers team that was moving on without him. Midway through the 2005 to 2006 season, with his stock as a former number 1 pick greatly diminished, Atlanta traded 26-year-old to the Dallas Stars for a fresh start. And it was in Dallas that one of the NHL's most infamous moments occurred. A moment that, unfair as it may be, came to symbolize Patrik Stefan's career. On January 4th, 2007, late in a game against the Edmonton Oilers, Stefan had a chance to seal victory with an empty goal net. What followed was a straight-up nightmare. He mishandled the puck on the empty net crease, falling and failing to score, after which the Oilers scooped out the puck, raced down the ice, and scored a tying goal with just a few seconds left. It was cruel, and it was the peak of Stefan's struggles. Even a routine moment turned out disastrous. The Stars eventually won that game in a shootout, but his empty net goal miss instantly entered hockey lore and damaged his reputation. It effectively became the final notable play of his NHL life. Within weeks, ongoing hip issues sidelined him, and the 2006 to 2007 season proved to be the last in his NHL career. Stefan's struggles showed how risky it was to pin an expansion team's future on one young player. But in 2000, the Islanders took an even bolder gamble, making Rick DiPietro the first goalie ever drafted first overall. By the late 1990s, the New York Islanders were a franchise in chaos. Once a proud 1980s dynasty, the Islanders had fallen on hard times, missing the playoffs and cycling through coaches and questionable front office decisions. In 2000, GM Mike Milbury decided to make a bold and controversial bet to revive the Isles. With the first overall pick of the 2000 draft, he selected Rick DiPietro, an 18-year-old American goalie from Boston University. It marked the first time in NHL modern history that a goaltender was taken number 1 overall. Milbury was enticed by DiPietro's athleticism and swagger. The teenager had already been turning heads by backstopping Team USA at the World Juniors and was touted as a future franchise goalie that one could build around. But drafting a goalie first came with a huge risk, something even Milbury acknowledged. The danger spot obviously is going with a youthful goaltender. To clear the way for DiPietro, Milbury went all in. He traded away veteran goalie Kevin Weeks on draft day, and even more shockingly, dealt away the Islanders' recent top goaltending prospect, Roberto Luongo, which now is one of the most infamous and worst trades in NHL history. Overnight, the Isles went from having 2 promising young goalies to putting all their eggs in DiPietro's basket. Thrust into the NHL as a 19-year-old starter in 2000 to 2001, DiPietro struggled with the enormous pressure, and frankly, with a weak team in front of him, he won only 3 of his 20 starts that rookie season, posting an 8.78 save percentage. However, the Islanders of that era were a young and dysfunctional group. The Islanders GM, Mike Milbury, was infamous for trading away some of his best players, and in general, with his trade moves, which made the team dysfunctional and just overall bad. The team's defense was so poor that even a future all-star like Zdeno Chara finished with a plus-minus of -27. Milbury, realizing their prized goalie wasn't ready for such a workload, the Isles sent him down to the minors to develop his game. Over the next couple of seasons, DiPietro was developing in the AHL and improving steadily. By 2003 to 2004, he finally looked NHL ready. He seized the Islanders' number 1 goalie job, making 50 starts and notching a solid .911 save percentage, along 5 shutouts. DiPietro was growing into a reliable netminder, and a core that now featured players like Alexei Yashin and Michael Pekka. They at least made playoff appearances in the early 2000s, though they never won a playoff series in that period. After the 2004-2005 lockout, DiPietro returned as a starter in the 2005 to 2006 season, and again put up decent numbers on a struggling team. This was enough to convince the Islanders that DiPietro was on the verge of becoming a franchise cornerstone. The Islanders made an eyebrow-raising move in September 2006. The team, now under GM Garth Snow, signed the 25-year-old DiPietro to a 15-year, $67.5 million contract extension. This contract was the longest in NHL history at the time, a bold commitment and a sign that the Islanders were certain that DiPietro would be the anchor in net through his prime and beyond. Initially, DiPietro tried to live up to that faith. He played well in the 2006-2007 season and was even selected to the All-Star game in 2008. But sadly, almost as soon as the mega deal was inked, DiPietro's body began to betray him. In March 2007, he suffered the first of many concussions, ending his season early. The injuries, however, didn't stop, and they kept piling. Within the next year, he underwent 2 hip surgeries, then had a knee surgery. Each time, he had to rehab and attempt comebacks. But every time he came back, something else went wrong. More knee issues, another concussion, groin strains, and so on. After 2008, DiPietro never managed to play more than 26 games in a season, as his health was betraying him. By 2010 to 2011, the supposed franchise goalie was mostly watching from the sides, while journeymen filled the net. The psychological toll was heavy too. Multiple head injuries can erode anyone's confidence, and the once sparse DiPietro later admitted that his mental state was fractured. The Islanders, who had bet everything on him, were now stuck with a massive contract for a player that couldn't stay on the ice. The team eventually bought out DiPietro's contract in 2013, a costly move that would mean they would pay him $1.5 million annually until the 2028-2029 season. DiPietro's NHL playing career ended at age 31, with a record of 130 wins, 136 losses. Certainly not the magic turnaround story the Islanders envisioned. DiPietro's collapse left the Islanders stuck in a limbo for years, a reminder of how a single draft gamble can derail a franchise. A decade later, however, the Edmonton Oilers made a similar misstep when they used their third straight first-round pick on Yakupov. The Edmonton Oilers of the early 2010s were a team stuck at the rock bottom, trying to climb back up through high draft picks. In 2010, 2011, and 2012, Edmonton had the first overall pick 3 years in a row, a nearly unprecedented run of draft lottery luck. By the time the 2012 draft arrived, the Oilers had already selected winger Taylor Hall and center Ryan Nugent-Hopkins as foundation pieces. The team was still in the cellar of the standings and in the midst of one of the worst stretches in their franchise's history. So the expectation was that the third consecutive #1 pick would be the finishing touch to finally complete the rebuild. The Oilers set the sights on Yakupov, a dynamic Russian winger from the OHL's Costliest. Yakupov was touted as a potential generational talent, a sniper with a lightning-quick shot and explosiveness, often compared to countryman Alexander Ovechkin in style. Edmonton chose Yakupov first overall in 2012, hoping that adding his scoring flair to their young core would turn the franchise around. The 2012 to 2013 season was delayed by a lockout, so Yakupov's NHL debut came in the shortened 48-game season of 2013. Despite the chaos, Yakupov made an immediate impression. He scored 17 goals in 48 games, tying for the team lead in goals and finishing with 31 points, which was fourth on the Oilers' scoring. At 19 years old, he showed the flash of brilliance that scouts have been talking about. A wicked one-timer, fearless shooting, and infectious enthusiasm. Fans in Edmonton were excited. It seemed they finally had the offensive firepower to climb upward. Yakupov's rookie output was on par with the other top rookies that year, and there was hope as the NHL returned to a full schedule, he would only get better with experience. Unfortunately, for both Yakupov and the Oilers, that promising debut would be as good as it ever got. In his sophomore season, 2013 to 2014, Yakupov's scoring regressed to 11 goals and 24 points in 63 games, and concerns began to surface about his all-around game. While a second-year dip isn't unheard of, Yakupov's defensive play and hockey sense were drawing heavy criticism. Coaches struggled to find the right role for him, and his ice time began to decline. The Oilers, meanwhile, remained a losing team, which didn't help the situation. It's hard for a young player to develop good habits in a chaotic environment. By 2014 to 2015, Yakupov had a modest bounce back to 33 points, but that was playing a full 81-game season, and many fans growing impatient, expecting a true breakout that never came. The Oilers cycled through coaches during Yakupov's tenure, and the lack of stability may have hurt his development. Yakupov still possessed talent, but he became a one-dimensional player. Flashes of offense offset by poor positioning and lackluster defensive effort. By the 2015 to 2016 season, he's fourth in Edmonton. The writing on the wall was clear. Yakupov managed just 8 goals and 23 points in 60 games that year, often looking lost on the ice and even spending time on the lower lines. The Oilers had seen enough. In the fall of 2016, still only 22 years old, Yakupov was traded to the St. Louis Blues for a small return, ending his chapter in Edmonton. After leaving the Oilers, Yakupov's NHL opportunities dried up quickly. He lasted just one season in St. Louis, with just 9 points in 40 games, and one more with the Colorado Avalanche, 16 points in 58 games. By 2018, no NHL teams were willing to sign the former top pick, and he returned to Russia to continue his career in the KHL. Yakupov became the symbol of Edmonton's wasted draft luck, proving again that lottery picks don't guarantee salvation. But this wasn't a new lesson. Decades earlier, the Minnesota North Stars learned it the hard way when they chose Brian Lawton first overall in 1983. Back in 1983, the Minnesota North Stars were in need of fresh talent for their franchise that had seen better days. They held the #1 overall pick in the 1983 NHL entry draft, and that year's draft class would turn out to be one of the most talent-rich ever. The likes of Pat LaFontaine, Steve Yzerman, Cam Neely were all top prospects in '83. The North Stars' choice at first overall was Brian Lawton, a high-scoring US high school player from Rhode Island. Lawton made history as the first American-born player and first high school player ever taken #1 overall in the NHL draft, and everything seemed promising. Standing at 6 foot, Lawton was a skilled center whom Minnesota scouts believed had the size and talent to be a franchise centerpiece. It was a daring pick in some respects, selecting a teenager straight out of high school, but the North Stars were convinced with Lawton's potential. They envisioned him as the next great NHL center, someone who could lead the line for years. Given the strength of the 1983 draft class, picking Lawton was also a statement. Minnesota passed on future Hall of Famers to stake their future on Lawton, and as all of the draftees on this list, there was immense pressure on the youngster to justify that decision and to keep the North Stars competitive in the evolving landscape of the 1980s NHL. His career began with a lot of eyes on him, and it became apparent early that he wasn't going to dominate. In his rookie season, 1983 to 84, Lawton managed just 31 points, 10 goals and 21 assists in 58 games. For an 18-year-old straight out of prep school, that wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't the immediate star impact Minnesota had hoped for. The next season was even more troubling. Lawton struggled mightily and even spent some time in minor leagues. In 1984 to 85, he split between the NHL and AHL, posting only 11 points in 40 NHL games. By year 2, the North Stars management was panicking. Their supposed franchise savior was looking out of his depth. To make matters worse, other players from his draft class were already flourishing by the 1984 to 85 season. Steve Yzerman was exploding into stardom with a 100-point season for Detroit, and Pat LaFontaine was a rising star for the Islanders. These comparisons were unavoidable and cast Lawton's struggles in an even harsher light. Minnesota tried to be patient, and over the next couple of seasons, Lawton did improve somewhat. He hit the 20-goal mark in the 1986 to 87 season, showing flashes of the solid player he could be. But even at his best, Lawton was a merely decent complementary player, not the franchise leader expected of a top draft pick. By the end of the 1987 to 88 season, after 5 years of waiting for a breakout that never came, the North Stars decided to cut the bait. Lawton was traded away, and over the next following seasons, Lawton bounced around several NHL teams: Rangers, Quebec Nordiques, Boston Bruins, and Hartford Whalers, without any notable resurgence. He was out of the NHL by 1990. He's finished his playing career in the minors, a far cry from the superstar status once predicted for him. Lawton finished his playing career with 266 points in 483 games, a stark contrast to Steve Yzerman, who Minnesota passed on in the same draft, who went on to score 1,755 points and win multiple cups. That comparison alone cemented Lawton's place among the biggest draft misfires in NHL history. For the North Stars, the miss deepened an already rough decade of poor results and weak attendance. Not until drafting Mike Modano in 1988 did they find the franchise player Lawton was supposed to be. But by then, the team had already lost momentum, and some argue the Lawton pick helped set the stage for the eventual relocation to Dallas. Lawton later found success off the ice as an agent and GM, but his name still surfaces most often in conversations about draft busts. He was a high school phenom who was supposed to save a franchise, yet became a reminder that top draft picks offer no guarantees.